I appreciate the opportunity, like I said, to visit with y'all about something that's been special to me. I had this opportunity arise a few years ago, and actually took it to retire early, a little bit early from Texas Parks and Wildlife, and jump on board for the with the Respect Big Bend initiative here at Borderlands Research Institute. It's something I'm proud of, and I think we've done a lot of good work, and we'll continue to do so. So with that said, I'm going to jump right into it. I got to start. Hope this is going to work, y'all. There we go. Just a quick plug for Borderlands Research Institute. For those that don't know, we are located at Sul Ross State University, and our mission is conserving the natural resources of the Chihuahuan Desert Borderlands through research, education, and outreach. We operate as somewhat of a nonprofit housed within the university's range and natural resource and natural resource and agriculture programs. We focus primarily on research as well as education and outreach. I encourage y'all, if y'all are not aware of us, to go ahead and find our website. It's pretty easy to find, and then sign up for some of our free newsletters. We'll keep you up to date on a lot of the work that we're doing here. My position was a brand new one. I'm the Associate Director of Stewardship Services. And what that obviously says is that I have a responsibility to work with area landowners on their management goals when they align with our conservation goals as well. But to be honest with you, the job really started with funding from the Mitchell Foundation, the C.G. Mitchell Foundation, Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. And I got to plug them for a second because I would not have had this opportunity if it wasn't for this organization. So I think many of you are aware of the last 20 years worth of energy development expansion that's taking place in far west Texas. And I think it was really the development of the Alpine High oil and gas development near Balmer-Ray that kind of got the attention of a lot of folks as it started to move, as a lot of that oil and gas development moved south into areas that had not existed before. And so as part of their actually their shale program, they opted to try to initiate a stakeholder driven process by which we encourage good, sound good energy development and the opportunities it brings, but at the same time respecting the conservation and social values of the region. So I don't need to, probably with this crowd, I don't need to talk a lot about the Texas Last Frontier, the Big Bend region. Obviously, a lot of what we have out here in far west Texas is some of the least impacted in the state when it comes to development, et cetera. So what's at risk when we talk about energy development? And I'm not just talking oil and gas, we're also talking renewables as well, because I think most of us understand that wind and solar development can have, on the landscape, can have as big or even bigger impact to ecosystems as oil and gas can. So we talk about the importance of the Chihuahuan Desert. Obviously, it's a very diverse region. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on that. We're one of the most diverse regions in the state, if not the country, because of our changes in geography, topography, precipitation patterns, aspect, soils. We've got a lot of different stuff, and it's important. It has a lot of importance from a biodiversity standpoint and from a cultural standpoint as well. Obviously, our biodiversity is high. I don't need to spend a bunch of time on that. We also have some of the darkest skies in the Western Hemisphere, which have been threatened at times with energy development, especially some of the stuff towards Midland, Odessa, and the Permian Basin. I say that light pollution threatens science. That's obviously the science that goes on at the McDonald Observatory, and they've done a fantastic job. We've partnered with them on their dark skies initiatives and some of the work they've done there. But also, some people don't think about the impact of communities. If y'all have been in the greater Big Bend region, you've visited Alpine, Marfa, Fort Davis, Marathon, some of our communities out here, and small town West Texas, and a lot of character and culture in these areas, and that's something that's important to folks as well. So one of our partners, which I'll list those later, that are one of our partners with Respect Big Bend, that was also funded by the Mitchell Foundation, was Hudson Pacific and their Human Dimensions group. And they've also done a lot of our communications work as well. In fact, if you go to the Respect Big Bend website, they've stood that up. But they, at the urging of the Mitchell Foundation, they did a public attitudes survey about energy development in West Texas. It's a public opinion research. Really had one of the most important parts of it was focus groups with the residents of Alpine, Fort Davis, and Pecos. And those that know Alpine and Fort Davis have not seen any significant energy development yet. Pecos has recently a whole lot. That town has changed a lot in the last 10 years or so. So it was interesting to see what those folks had to say in these focus groups. Plus, they did a statewide survey of 1,000 registered voters and oversampled the region, those counties you see highlighted there, over 200 interviews, extra in those shaded counties. The bottom line is, and I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but as expected, there's a lot of concern about energy development when it occurs. These are some of the things that folks are concerned about: damaged infrastructure, contaminated water, increasing crime, price inflation. These are community values. These are things that folks see when energy developments occur, and they occur really fast, and they can have a big impact. So what do folks need and want? Well, they have reasonable expectations. They want better planning. They want to protect their infrastructure. They want to restore land and communities. And they want to be educated. And these are four things that often don't occur with energy development. It happens fast, it impacts the communities, it impacts the land at a very high rate, typically, as we've seen across our state. So this idea we had here was the Respect Big Bend initiative was stood up because of BRI's status in the community and the fact that we were able to pull together local stakeholders to walk through this process. We were selected. And Dr. Lewis Harbison, our director, is a long-time friend of mine. We've been friends for 20 years, partners on a lot of projects. And he asked if I'd be interested in this opportunity. I said, absolutely. I couldn't turn it down. It doesn't hurt that I went as a regional director for Parks and Wildlife of 46 staff, or 42 staff down to 2 staff, but that's part of it. You know, as you can imagine, it's a little less stress. I was bragging when I first got this job. I went from over 100 work-related emails a day down to about 2 or 3. Well, I'm back up to almost 100 now. So I didn't keep that retirement gig very long. But just a quick note here about some of our project partners that were also part of this process. I'll just let you read through those quickly. Obviously, we've had it's been a big group lift, and I'll mention some other funders at the end of the slideshow, but the Mitchell Foundation was far and away the catalyst for it, and they've been funding us ever since. So this mission is their mission of the Respect Big Bend initiative is to inspire and empower all stakeholders to conserve the unique resources and protect the iconic communities of the greater Big Bend region while developing energy responsibly. It's not anti-energy development as much as it is utilizing sound science and common sense when developing energy and trying to do it in a way that is respectful of the communities and natural resources of the area. So we focused initially into 3 counties, and I'll be honest with you, we started these 3 counties thinking we would expand to the other counties as well. However, because of the COVID situation and some of the economic situations, we've opted to go ahead and utilize this region's values, if you will, that were elevated as part of the process, and apply those across the entire region. And I think it makes sense because, you know, really that's some of the most, those 3 counties encumber some of the most pristine, if you will, areas of the state that has not been impacted, of the region, excuse me, of West Texas has not been impacted. So that said, I will qualify that as we walk through this. We'll see some values here in a bit that they selected that it may change. You know, if you went to Culberson County or Reeves County, those values may change somewhat. But I think from a unimpacted standpoint, it made a lot of sense. So this, I'm going to tell y'all real quick. I got to qualify my slideshow. This is pulled from a lot of different slideshows I've done, different PowerPoints. So there is, it doesn't have a consistent theme throughout, but the idea here is that we work with our friends at the Nature Conservancy, and it says conservation by design there, but it's actually been changed to development by design. And the idea is you build a knowledge base, get as much information as you can, you provide information, assistance, empower those stakeholders, and engage industry as well along the way, and as well as our local stakeholders, regulators, and the general public to guide that development. So it's pretty ambiguous, it sounds like, but the idea behind it's pretty cool. So just real quickly, some of our key stakeholders we identified that we reached out to were regulators, the general public, influencers, community, media, partners, industry, and landowners. Obviously, from a BRI perspective, from what I was tasked with, we were heavy working with landowners, our conservation partners, our community members and leaders, and some to a lesser extent the general public as much as we could. While other individuals within the Respect Big Bend initiative, they kept a lot of the other stakeholders engaged. I should say as well, obviously, industry itself. We had some great industry representation on our stakeholder advisory group, but we've had individuals within the Respect Big Bend initiative that, for example, brief the governor and lieutenant governor, Public Utilities Commission, everybody that might hear about it. We wanted to get ahead of them so they knew what this was about. They've received tremendous support throughout. So the overall idea, as I mentioned before, is to achieve a balance that allows for responsible energy development while still understanding and doing our best to preserve the values that we cherish about wherever we might live. So development by design. Our friends at the Global Nature Conservancy, primarily a guy named Joe Kiesicker, who kind of developed this blueprint, if you will, helped us out immensely. In fact, Joe was at every one of our stakeholder advisory group meetings, and we had to work around his schedule because he's doing this work across the planet. He may be in Mongolia one week, he may be in South America the next week, Australia, you just never know, but he's working across the planet to try to minimize the impact of energy development while still maximizing its positive impact on communities and economy, etc. So the idea here, one of his quotes is go big and go early. So instead of developing energy site by site, the idea is to get as much country as you can think of, create a conservation vision of what you want to see in that country, that landscape. Project future energy development the best you can with the best science you have, which ours came from the Bureau of Economic Geology at UT. They were another partner in this process. Project where the development might occur. You estimate impacts. You overlay. And I want to back up real quick. I think it's important to understand when you create a conservation vision, you're trying to think about how much of what you cherish do you actually need, right? This is a balance. There may be some loss. There's going to be some loss. But at the same time, what do you actually need? How much desert grasslands do we really need? How much Sky Island habitat do we need? And if we need so much, let's try to figure out where that development's going to occur and how we can minimize that impact, whatever that may be, whatever mitigation actions that may be. And typically, obviously, in the state of Texas, that's going to involve working with the landowner or the mineral owner as well as industry to minimize that footprint. Whether it be best management practices, whether it be moving site development, whatever we can do to minimize those impacts and still maintain that conservation value. So from our standpoint here at BRI, we had a very heavy lift on the stakeholder and community engagement. We wanted to make sure that folks understood what we were doing. And once again, this is hard to get your head around, and I can tell you we've had a lot of folks question what this is. And as I have spent 20 years in the Trans-Pecos, I can tell you, at least from a landowner and from a community member standpoint, there's a lot of folks that would be prone to question something like this. Is this a government land grab, or is it something that is basically just laying the framework for something a little more what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe regulatory in a sense. And the truth is, throughout this, now I'm not saying regulations may not change because of some of the work we've done, but at the end of the day, that was not the idea. This was an exercise in cooperation and coming together to try to formulate what's important and how we might best preserve that moving forward. Just list those conservation, or excuse me, those stakeholders there that we worked with. The most important of which, and one of the one I'm most proud of, is the Stakeholder Advisory Group. That's 17 members from Brewster, Jeff Davis, and Presidio counties, as I mentioned a while ago, 5 ranchers, 4 conservation partners, 5 community members, and 3 industry partners. Excuse me. And they met 14 times over 2.5 years. I will back up real quick. I will say that Dr. Harvison and I were fortunate enough to kind of handpick these folks, being out here for several decades like we knew a lot of folks, and we picked those that we felt were the most engaged and the most passionate about the effort. And you know, when you start selecting folks like that out of a small applicant pool, if you will, you know, these small communities out here, they've already been tasked with a lot. They may be county commissioners, they may sit on the school board, they may sit on numerous volunteer groups, and they're already tasked with a lot. And every one of them started, when we asked them if they wanted to be involved, they'd start by saying, man, I'm really busy, right? I'm really got a lot going on. But I'll also say not a single one turned us down. They all felt the same pressures that we all feel out here with seeing the development get closer and closer, understanding what they love about the area, and they all stepped in and did a great job. And it was a heavy lift. It was anywhere from 2 to 3 hours or more each one of those meetings. And we luckily got started before COVID hit, and so we had a pretty good synergy going among folks. But obviously that carried us through with the meeting remotely afterwards, because all the meetings initially were supposed to be in person. I will just say this personally, one of the most gratifying things that I saw through this process in today's day and age is the fact that we purposely picked folks from different political leanings, if you will. Some were conservative, some were liberal. Yet it was amazing to watch how much they agreed on, and very little consternation. A lot of folks. One of my good friends, Craig Carter, who was one of the members, said one of the best things that's happened throughout this process is I'm talking to people that I haven't talked to, that I would never talk to, right? We don't run in the same circles. And so when you see that happen and you see that synergy happen, it's pretty gratifying. So basically, the rest of us stepped back, helped facilitate these discussions, but it really was the SAG that steered the ship. We just helped build the ship, build the process. They steered the ship. They identified shared biological and social values, and we understood we're going to use science to make decisions. There's a short list of the individuals that helped us through this process. So I hope Krista's on here. If she is, she was one of our, she came in late to the game because she took Russell Martin's position out here, but she was very helpful and jumped right in and did a great job. One of the tasks I gave them early on was, I said, here's kind of our sideboards, right? We want to have creative, constructive conversation. We want feedback from the community. Whatever you talk to your neighbors and friends, see what they say. Let's get that as part of our process. Is not just y'all, but who y'all talk to. We need to vocalize our values. We need to minimize politics. We're going to leave that at the door, and we never had a problem with that. Discretion, and I mentioned a while ago how things in the coffee shop can get kind of upside down sometimes. So that was part of the idea, because we had this is a spatial exercise. You'll see here in a bit, one of our products is spatially based. And honestly, maps at times and the trans packets can get folks concerned. So we asked for discretion, not just because of the map, but anything we taught behind those doors they needed to stay there. We asked them to take ownership of it. We asked them to be ambassadors as they are out and about, and they've done a great job of that. So here's the values I mentioned a while ago. These are the values of the Greater Big Bend region as they laid out, right? And I'm not going to read them to you, but you can see them there. I think this is the first time that I'm aware of that we've ever captured what folks really considered to be important about this region, what they felt from a human standpoint that was important. Obviously, a lot of us as biologists can look at that list and see where our priorities fall. These were not listed in any particular order. They were not weighted, if you will. However, it became pretty evident real fast that the ranching heritage of the region, which has resulted in these large cattle ranches that still make up the vast majority of the Trans-Pecos, even though we do have the greatest amount of public land in the state with Big Bend National Park, Big Bend Ranch State Park, and some of our other our public lands, we still are the vast majority of it's still privately owned. And that's the understanding the appreciation for private property rights was paramount. We wanted to get that out front and center. But these large unimpacted areas of private ranches and cattle ranching that has been here for the last 120 years is the reason we still have wildlife habitat and the reason we still have view sheds and dark skies, remoteness and quietness. And as those ranchers are pressed to develop, whether it be from energy or from actual human development, they face a lot of challenges. It's not anything that I have to tell y'all. You know that every private landowner state feels it. Obviously, with our continued drought, the cattle market, blah blah blah. There's a lot going on to put pressure on these folks, and if we need to do what we can to maintain those large pieces of property because they, at some level, they impact all these values, right? That's kind of the idea behind it. So we took those, I think I missed a slide here. Let me back up real quick, I apologize. But those values, what we then did was take each one of those and put them into where possible, we utilized a spatial proxy for each one. And this was pretty cool. It was actually, not everyone obviously has a spatial proxy, but those that did, we took those proxies and integrated them into a conservation decision support tool that's spatially based to see where the regions are that held the most, or the areas that held the most value cumulatively, if you will. So an example of that, if you look at wildlife and migratory corridors, for example. BRI, a lot of our data was used in this effort. You look at our bighorn sheep habitat suitability connectivity model that was just completed, a very robust model with 26,000 locations for bighorn sheep, and then applying those locations, those known locations, back to the environmental values of elevation, slope, terrain, roughness, and woody vegetation cover. That's something that BRI has already been doing for quite some time, but it can be incorporated into this tool by this spatial data set that shows us connectivity that we see across the region, right? And so when you combine all these, one I just got to mention real quick, I thought was really cool was the view sheds, right? That's one of the things that you see when you come to the Trans-Pecos is these large unimpacted view sheds. And our friends at TNC actually did a view shed analysis. That's another level layer that was incorporated as well. That it was everything you can see from a particular highway, public roadway in the Trans-Pecos, and it shows, it pops big time. Obviously, as you get out this direction, you can see a long ways, and that's what drives a lot of our tourism, which is another one of those values that you saw there. Very important value for the economics of the region. So each of these values were incorporated into a combined data set, which we've actually just changed the name of this. I think I don't want to until we figure out the final name of this tool. I don't want to roll it out, but this is an example of what that combined values look like, and it kind of makes sense. You can see those regions that are less impacted, those sky islands, those Chihuahua Desert grasslands that are important, areas that have been heavily impacted by the human footprint. And like if you look in Reeves County, a lot of that's obviously oil and gas development. Those regions are shaded more purple. Those regions that have a higher cumulative value are the green ones. This is a tool that I'll talk more about here in a second. Let me just keep moving forward. So this is kind of there. They are. I'm sorry. Those are the spatial proxies that we utilized, even though that's a very, very quick overview of that. And speaking of quick overview, I'm going to jump into the next portion of this, which is looking at potential oil and gas development. This is not my forte. This is obviously our friends at Bureau of Economic Geology, oil and gas and wind and solar, excuse me. And so I was amazed to find out there have been over 1,000 wells just drilled in Tri-County area, Jeff Davis, Brewster, and Presidio counties in the last 100 years. And most of those are dry holes. There is some potential development in the future, but it's going to be a ways down the road, and I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, so you look at current development, and you can see where it's occurring now, primarily in that Permian and Delaware Basin, and getting down into the Balmorhea area somewhat. What you see down below in the smaller pictures, I'm sorry about the quality here, but that's wind, solar, and wind potential for the region as well. I think I got some better slides coming up on that. Now I know this is hard to see, and I apologize, but these top slides kind of show the 3 different scenarios for oil and gas development in the future. And what we really see over the next 20, 30 years is we don't see a lot of oil and gas development creeping into the Tri-County area, if you will, those 3 counties. It's further north and east, but that's not to say it won't happen, right? The substrates are still down there, the rocks are still down there. When technology eventually catches up, there probably will be oil and gas development in the region. It's probably just not in the next decade or two. And I think I may have skipped the wind and solar slide, one of the best things y'all could look at, but I'll give you, hopefully here pretty quick, you'll be able to look at this thing yourself. We just haven't rolled it out yet. But bottom line is, from a wind and solar standpoint, the electricity transfer infrastructure is not there yet. We continue to have dialogues with our friends at ERCOT and the Public Utilities Commission, and that's probably going to change in the future. So we need to be ready for that. But our Chihuahuan Desert grasslands are some of the most prone for solar development. And as that change takes place, we really want to be part of the process. So this gives you an idea of what this tool could be used for, just briefly. This, for example, the transmission line, original, just a quick, this is not a real world thing, but if you have a proposed transmission line and you have the ability to move it, then with a couple of different alternatives to minimize those impacts in areas that are less green, if you will, green being the higher value stuff, that would be the process. And I failed to mention there's another portion of this tool, and I really should have rolled the tool out more, and I can come back and do another presentation on the tool when we get that thing up, standing up properly. It's the ability to upload your own polygon, your own ranch, or whatever it may be, your own site development, and then see how many of the values are impacted. And we've been going through some dry runs with actually some of our industry partners to see how it works, and so far it looks like it's working pretty good. But I will qualify that here in a second when I talk about it. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about the recommendations from Stakeholder Advisory Group. So we actually put together 2 separate publications, if you will, from Respect Big Bend. One of them is directly related to what the SAG learned, the Stakeholder Advisory Group learned, and the other one is more of it's a shorter read, and the other one is a much more in-depth review of the science that went into the effort, and a lot of more the technical aspects of what's occurred. Out of the Stakeholder Advisory Group portion of it, the shorter report, they came up with 4 separate recommendations. One is to obtain stakeholder input to avoid negative impacts of energy development. What they're saying there is that this has been a worthwhile process, and it should be replicated. And I can tell you that it probably will be replicated. The Mitchell Foundation and a lot of others have taken note of this, and I have a feeling that this is going to prove to be a template that could be used elsewhere. Establish a Center for Land Stewardship, or for Landowner and Community Resources, the Center for Land Stewardship and Community Engagement, which is housed here at BRI, and I'm in charge of, and I'll talk about here in a second as well. What that does, by establishing a center on the tail end of this effort, we don't have reports that end up sitting on a shelf being stagnant and not being able to be dynamic and change. The tool I mentioned to you a while ago, when we do roll this out, well, I'll talk about it more in a second, but if we don't have somebody watching over that and incorporating new data, as projections change, as different value sets, or excuse me, data sets become available, then it just becomes stagnant. So that's one important part of it. Also, just to have a resource for landowners and communities as well. That's the idea behind this. I think it's very important, and it's something that we were really trying to flesh out now here at BRI. Support programs to keep large tracts of land intact to preserve the values that they provide to all the citizens of the state. I think you can see one of our partners there was the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, one of our most valued partners. Obviously, conservation easements are part of that process. Incentives to increase the bottom line, the ability from an economic standpoint of ranchers to be able to stay on the land and not have to sell or see. And to be honest with you, most ranchers in the Tri-County area, and a lot of them out here, I would say all ranchers in West Texas and probably across the state don't necessarily want to see a solar farm on their property or a wind farm or even oil and gas wells. It's a reality of the economics of the time. And so if they have some opportunities to see some help in reaching their goals for production as well as conservation, which are often aligned, those should be explored. And when I say that, I'm talking about cost share programs through the NRCS and here at BRI and our friends at Parks and Wildlife, and these the ability to help a landowner meet their conservation goals and their production goals and enhance wildlife habitat at the same time, helping them reach that economic level to stay on the land. And finally, restore land disturbed by energy development. That's something that we will continue to work on. We probably have a big lift there in the future. Obviously, it's a huge amount of problems with historic development, but we're trying to stay engaged in that as well. There at the bottom is the Respect Big Bend final report. Both reports are available there. I'll try to stick that in the chat. Maybe Paul can as well. So real quickly, the Center for Land Stewardship Community Engagement. This is the landing spot, an application portal for competitive cost share programs, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. That's part of what we do with landowners. Resources for conservation partners and landowners to make informed decisions. We hosted the Summit on Healthy Land and Energy Development in Midland on April 6th. Was well attended. We've got a lot of interest from industry, and we hope to continue that. To be honest with you, the tool that I'll mention here in a minute is kind of the carrot, if you will, to have folks come visit with us. That's a quick description of the decision support tool. If you look at that, okay, second bullet, it's a screening level tool that can be used to help inform conservation siting decisions. It's not the end all, it's not perfect, right? And we know that. And we want to be very cautious. We want to engage industry and landowners as they start to have these conversations ahead of time, and maybe there's stuff that tool doesn't hit on, and we need to be aware of that. For example, we do not have a cultural layer to that simply because it does not exist at this time. However, we have friends here at the Center for Big Bend Studies who have done an immense amount of work across the region, and we continue to engage them when these opportunities occur for development, make sure we're not impacting cultural resources. But I say that the developer is not impacting cultural resources if at all possible. But it's really the idea that this tool just gets you to talking to us, and then hopefully we can point you in the right direction or be part of the process on the ground to help inform those decisions. Quickly, our project partners I mentioned a while ago. I think I doubled that slide, and here, real quick, I got that slide in the wrong spot. I did that right before I started talking to Paul a while ago, so I apologize. So the Cynthia Georgia Mitchell Foundation stood this effort up, but these are the Stillwater Foundation, the Meadows Foundation, the Permian Basin Area Foundation also have chipped in and continue to do so. Been some big supporters. Questions and discussion. So I can't help but plug. We have this upcoming Trans-Pecos Wildlife Conference in Alpine week after next, and hope to see y'all there. We will be talking about energy development, Respect Big Bend initiative, as well as some of our cost share opportunities. And I got to qualify that. We do have, for example, we partnered up with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here with the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program that we're funneling through BRI to do more work on the conservation or landowner partners on the ground of cost share efforts on primarily grassland and riparian restoration, as well as I'm excited to announce we have finalized our programmatic agreement with NRCS on a $3.5 million RCPP, Regional Conservation. Y'all know what RCPP is, hopefully. Regional Cooperative Conservation Partnership. With our primary partner on that is Texas Agricultural Land Trust. We're real excited to start rolling that out here this next year and working as well with landowners. We've got a lot of interest out there. We have already been, there's a lot, I got to say, a lot of what we do, what I help do is kind of organize our Trans-Pecos conservation partners, other organizations such as TPWD and Rio Grande Joint Venture and others, and they've all got great projects going on, and we're really trying to work cohesively, cooperatively across the landscape to maximize those efforts. That's one small part of it. Energy development's another part of it, and often they overlap quite a bit. So that's it for me. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, I guess, Paul.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks a lot, Billy. That was great. Congrats on the RCPP. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, so there's only one question in the Q&A so far. So now is the time to get your questions in, people, if you have anything that you want Billy to talk about. So thankfully, the one question in there is rather lengthy, and it's got like 8 sub-questions. So this will keep us busy for a while. So is there typically a nexus of some kind to motivate energy developers to move through any sort of substantive environmental due diligence like you've got them there? Is this purely voluntary, or are there regulatory handles that make people want to kind of come to the table and talk about this stuff?
There are minimal regulatory handles in the state of Texas. Other states have, Surface Use Act and some type of notification to communities, et cetera. But in the state of Texas, there's not. That said, our primary partners, industry partners we worked with through this effort were, especially from oil and gas standpoint, were Apache and Concho, and then of course they were acquired by ConocoPhillips, which is luckily another very conservation-minded corporation. What they said, that exact question was brought up to them early on in the process by one of our stakeholder advisory group members. Why are you here? And I thought it was answered pretty well. And because when you deal with companies like that have a pretty strong conservation ethic, I think they made it pretty clear. It makes good business sense to engage stakeholders, right? Whether it's from a conservation standpoint or from a community standpoint, it makes good business sense. So you don't get everything. At the end of the day, you can save money economically by engaging and working towards a common goal versus not necessarily, seeing what those values are at first. So we're laying out the framework of how they can minimize impacts. We're trying to make it easy for industry. But to be honest with you, it's tough, right? And it's as tough with renewables as it is with the oil and gas. I mean, that's just been a wildcatter situation right now with renewables, and we've seen that across the state. And but yeah, no, the it's all voluntary, but there is a lot of interest, obviously, from ESG's requirements on those companies that are publicly owned. Those kind of drive some of this, and we hope to be available to help them when those companies, when they have an interest. So I hope that answered that pretty well. But we got a long ways to go. I guess we still have a long. There is no regulatory, not a significant regulatory nexus at this time.
Okay, great, thanks. This question continues a bit here. I'm curious what the atmosphere is there. Is it the case where all the developer needs is a willing landowner, and they're able to proceed with development? It seems like there is significantly lower population density. There might not be the same hurdles to community buy-in. I guess it's areas where there's more landowners per given area.
That's the point. Yeah, we do. Obviously our landowners are. It's a big country. Some of the biggest counties in the state, but they are. You may have ranches may vary in size from 20 to 50 to 100 to 300,000 acres. if those individuals, now let's be clear, a lot of those landowners now are, and that's just a guess, closer to 50% of them probably are absentee. And that's because those traditional landowners that had those historic family ranches have had to sell at some point in time because of economic realities. But those that are still here, and often the managers that have a heavy influence on decision making, are members of the community. And so I think there's an appreciation for it. We saw that through the stakeholder advisory group process. There is a kind of more of a cohesive, I guess, if you will, understanding of how we can all benefit from these intact landscapes. But yeah, it's. And I think another thing I want to mention real quick, we're very fortunate throughout much of this region, anyways, that when it comes to mineral interest, the majority mineral owner makes the decisions on oil and gas development. And at least in this region, the bulk of our surface owners are also the majority mineral owners, which is not the case the rest of the state. And that you see that a lot, where the surface owner is impacted significantly because the mineral owner is separated and makes a decision that impacts the surface to some level. So yes, I guess.
Oh, great. A comment here, it says, I didn't hear any mention of water.
Water resources were on that values list, and that means a couple things. That obviously means our natural surface water. Our springs were one of the springs and riparian areas, and one of the things that were mapped in the values mapping effort. Groundwater, we continue to tackle. It's something that, if you read the reports, it came up from our stakeholder advisory group, and it's something that we try to stay engaged with moving forward. It's a huge issue in an arid region, and water obviously very, very important for oil and gas hydraulic fracturing efforts. So there's so many folks in that arena. We're probably not engaging as much as we could on groundwater. However, I will say that that's the idea is, and I failed to mention, I got to mention this. I'm sorry, I just completely spaced this off. But so this tool, which we will stand up here to the general public here real soon, is stagnant. Was created by the Nature Conservancy, and the projections are not up to date. We now have some pretty solid groundwater data, like we'd like to incorporate in there as well. But the Nature Conservancy has moved on to other things. They're going to allow us to continue to use their landing platform, but we have stood up the capacity here at BRI through the center to build our own, and we hopefully get that out in the next year or so. And that one will be much more dynamic, probably more interactive, and some of these data sets, such as groundwater resources, will be incorporated as well.
Awesome. There's a couple of good questions here about kind of general advocacy. So is there a way that Texans can support your work and or proactively advocate to municipalities, ERCOT, energy companies, or other actors to ensure that Respect Big Bend is included as a stakeholder at the table with energy development infrastructure planning, and that they are using your research and models to inform their planning?
I should have an answer for that. It's fantastic. From an individual standpoint, we've kind of been flying solo on this deal, but I would think, the Mitchell Foundation is having conversations now about taking the show on the road, if you will, and they would like BRI to be part of that process, just as kind of a train the trainer, from a local stakeholder engagement standpoint. Let me get back to you on that. I think that just reaching out, to your locally elected officials and would be one of the first steps, and some of your regulatory entities. But I appreciate that. I'm gonna make a note of that and see if we can't get back to this group at some point with some thoughts on that from our friends at Mitchell and some of our other partners in Respect Big Bend, because we always try to think about our individual efforts to reach those decision makers versus maybe the public doing a better job of, obviously, going to the Respect Big Bend website and tying into social media efforts. I think that's kind of starting to stagnate. And I would say BRI is going to be probably the place for the landing in the future. But let me get back to you on that, Paul.
Yeah, great. And there's a sort of a similar question that says a lot of Texans love visiting this part of Texas, Big Bend National Park, Big Ranch State Park, Balmoral, Fort Davis, etc. And so how can I, the person asking the questions as a tourist, support these Big Bend conservation efforts? So same kind of question. So there's a lot of interest out there, from across the state in supporting this kind of work in that area.
Yeah, and I think the same thing. I mean, I encourage you to. I not want to move away from Respect Big Bend necessarily. Then it's not a one and done type of deal. But obviously we've kind of incorporated all that through here at BRI, and we continue to add our capacity. And so I think we're gonna be, for example, we probably be front and center at, if we can, at some of our industry partners' efforts in the Permian Basin and elsewhere. But once again, I'll get back to you on that. I think engaging with BRI, we've got through this effort, we were able to hire a fantastic communications coordinator, and she's been amazing. And we're hitting a lot of different things out here at BRI, but this one's obviously one of our most important, and we'll continue to work at it. So I just stay engaged, and we'll hopefully provide more avenues for that in the future. Thank you. Now, I know there's something I'm spacing off, and I apologize, but if I think of it, or if I can find it, I'll get back to y'all.
That sounds great. Thank you. This is great questions. Another one here says, has the impact of the oil and gas Bakken development on western North Dakota since 1989 been reviewed for comparison of values, methods, and results, as it is a very similar situation?
It's used as an example, for sure.
Yeah.
That's one of Joe Keesicker's favorite slides when you look at light pollution and how the Bakken development basically went from a completely intact landscape to an industrial landscape within a few years. I can't speak to that. I don't know. I feel like probably the Nature Conservancy and others have been involved up there to some extent, but I'm sorry, I just can't speak to that. I know it's a tremendous loss of amazing habitat, and just it's an example of how fast things can change. And we've seen some out here too. Obviously, northern Culberson County, the Delaware Basin development has been, which just blew Pecos up. That all that occurred in a decade or less, and it's obviously had some impact, especially from a night skies standpoint, dark sky standpoint.
That's great. Can you discuss windmills, solar farms, and view shed maintenance? Can we kind of defend against the sort of green infrastructural stuff that's occurring?
Say green infrastructural?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, talking to some friends at TREAD, and I don't want to get that acronym. I guess it sounds like that the incentives are about to play out, but we've heard that before. I don't know for sure, but there was actually a bill passed last session, I believe, that for the first time ever, it was determined that at least moving forward, I don't think anything was grandfathered in, but if you're a landowner and you had wind development on your property, and you did not have it written into your surface use agreement to remove infrastructure afterwards, you could be stuck with it, right? But now there's a state law, as I understand it, that requires those companies moving forward to come back and remove, those giant concrete foundations and everything else, and restore the land, which was a big step, obviously. But that's tough. It comes up at every single conference I go to, and I'm just going to throw it out there. Obviously the template said, and we're moving towards a carbon neutral society, and the idea that green energy is the way to go, and I think we all support that to some level, but and I support it also from a landowner's individual ability to derive income off their property, but it's impactful, and it's not done in a way typically that is often it's not done in a way that's respectful of conservation or societal values. And I think wind farms are one of those that get the biggest hit because of how big they are and what impact they make to the landscape. So I guess the short answer is there's nothing in place right now other than continued engagement, and we've had some good engagement. I will say that we've engaged some of our partners with renewable development companies and had some luck there, but that's a tough one. I personally feel that our nexus is with the landowner, right? The landowner ultimately, even the surface owner, makes that decision. You know, that's their decision, and we want to be a resource for them. In fact, they're already getting offers, right? In the Trans-Pecos, they're already getting solar and wind offers all the time. They're just not strong enough yet for most of them to make that decision to lease their wind or solar rights. So hopefully within the next year, we'll stand up a Trans-Pecos renewables development workshop for landowners, make them more aware, and talk about options, talk about the need to enter into a strong surface use agreement, and talk about whether or not it's something they really want to do. If they don't really want to do it, do we have some other options to incentivize non-development? And that's something we talk about a lot. But for example, term conservation easements, where an outside entity might purchase those wind or solar rights for a period of 20 years and just with the understanding they will not be developed, right? Because they can be hugely impactful to just from a conservation standpoint, not only our view sheds and tourism, but they can be hugely impactful for migration corridors for bighorn sheep to pronghorn habitat and wintering grassland bird habitat in the Chihuahuan Desert grasslands. So yeah, that's something that we want to continue to be. If we focus on the landowner, I think we've got something to go with. But it's a tough haul. That one right there is tough, and obviously we wish that they would develop those areas that have already been heavily impacted, and they are right now. There's a lot more development in those areas that have already been heavily impacted from previous oil and gas development. Hope I answered that question.
Oh, that's great, Billy. That's awesome. Somebody asked the slides that you showed regarding the solar and wind energy, maybe the potential development and the future development slides. Are they in the report? I posted that link. Okay.
They are in the report. I think actually the technical report will show more of them. They'll also be on the tool when we slide it out. Now they'll be somewhat dated, as I mentioned, but I want to be clear on that tool, which we hope to roll out here in the next month, the most. And we're held up by a couple of tweaks we wanted the Nature Conservancy to make, but they're no longer funded, so it's just kind of tough to get those done. But if I failed to mention, I think that you can actually click on individual projections. You can see where those land on the landscape. You can click on individual values, see where they are, etc. So it's very dynamic and has the ability to let the user pick what they want to pick, plus generate a report for whatever area you may be interested in. So a couple of different options there, and I apologize for not having better slides.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. A few more questions here. The data viewer map. Dark green areas include national and state parks, as far as I can ascertain. Do these parks have special exemptions from energy development, or do they rely on BRI work?
No, they do. I know that on national parks for sure, they cannot develop energy without a lot of work. In fact, Big Bend National Parks, because of the lack of reliable energy in the southern Brewster and Presidio counties, they're one of the entities down there that's looked at trying to develop maybe their own distributed solar facility within the park, and it's been just, you can imagine that's so difficult. It would be a very small footprint in the previously developed area, but even just getting that done has been tough for them. So yeah, it's tough. I don't want to speak for wildlife management areas and state parks specifically. I know that from a TPWD standpoint on property that's owned by Texas Parks and Wildlife, I don't think I don't want to speak about policy, and somebody out here probably knows better than I do, but I mean, we have current development on some of our state-owned areas that may have just been there when the properties were acquired, but they're also in holdings by other entities within those state parks and wildlife management areas that are not necessarily owned by Texas Parks and Wildlife. So they may be owned by another state agency, and so there could be the potential for development, but those were considered to be protected areas, and that's why they received that more green shading, if you will, as well, because they were considered protected.
Great. What landowner education do you do and the means of doing it? Do you have newsletters, site visits, word of mouth? And then there's a sort of a follow-up comment here. Can you enlist for public outreach more grassroots partners, such as local Texas Mountain Naturalists and International Dark Sky affiliated organizations?
We do partner with those organizations already. They're part of our conservation partners network that we have out here. We certainly, continue to engage them and kept them informed through the process. Our outreach efforts are pretty significant. I know that I'm going to get them mixed up. I think it's Borderlands News is the one that is a hard copy that's distributed to 5,000 landowners in West Texas every I think 2 months. So, but if you go to our BRI webpage, you can find all the different avenues we have for staying informed, and also a lot of those e-newsletters, etc. But in this Trans-Pecos Wildlife Conference that's coming up the week after next, that's a landowner-centered conference, and part of our deliverables for our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners grant, especially for RCPP or through NRCS, is landowner workshops. We engage with people, organizations like the Trans-Pecos Grazing Lands Coalition, which is a peer-to-peer group that really gets a lot of traction with area landowners, and so we're going to be doing a lot more work with them. But it's everything you can imagine. We try to do everything we can, and honestly, a lot of it, what happened to me this morning at the gas station, just having a conversation and just having to run into somebody and have a conversation. So I hope that answered that.
Yeah, no, that's great, Billy. Somebody commented that for any TPWD lands, any easements that go through the lands would require TPWD commission approval. So there's a process and a step, but I guess it's technically possible under some circumstances.